This is a very exciting session. Not that the other three were not. My name is Ramzi Baroud. Assalamu alaikum. Hello. Hola. My background is in people's history. The idea that we use people as the main unit of analysis to understanding history and understanding complex social phenomena. So in other words, taking the people out of the margins and bringing them as active participants in the creation of meaning, be it political, social, otherwise. I am truly honored to be moderating this session, especially with such an impressive number of intellectuals and academicians and activists and scholars. We are all very grateful for this opportunity and for all the people who worked very hard and diligently in order for them to create this forum and this platform for all of us. I was born in a refugee camp in Gaza. I did not have an ID card that defined me as a Palestinian. I had what they called laissez-passer, that where my nationality was defined as undefined, right? So whenever I traveled, I would give my laissez-passer to the whatever border police, and they would look and they would say, what does that mean? Undefined. And you kind of try to explain the political circumstances, but the fact is, when you have a whole nation that is really more or less kind of operate with the assumption that they are outside the realm of definitions, that they can't be defined as people, and then they struggle for their entire existence just to achieve that particular gain of being defined as people. I recognize that you exist. You can't even imagine the individual and the collective repercussions of that marginalization. Now, Palestinians were quite unique in that phenomenon in the Middle East, but that is no longer the case. After the so-called Arab Spring, and I say so-called Arab Spring because I am wary of generalized definitions and because the term Arab Spring was really not authored by an Arab, but rather by a Western journalist, so I'm quite cautious. That said, after the Arab Spring, there has been new nations joining that realm of people in search for definitions of who they are as people. As a result, if you recall, whenever a revolution would start somewhere, immediately they would change the flag, they would change the anthem, they would change the symbols. They even try to rewrite the history, the physical references, what city matters and what doesn't, where is the center of power, and so forth and so on. So this is not an intellectual exercise, it's rather a very fundamental issue in how nations perceive themselves. And by the end of the day, when the storm is going to settle, we could actually have brand new definitions of who we are as people. The Syrians are struggling with this, the Iraqis are struggling with this, because nobody is going to settle for being a refugee. I refuse the fact that someone could precede me and identify me and deal with me and relate to me as a refugee. The same applies to the Iraqis and the Yemenis and the Syrians and the Egyptians and the Libyans and so forth and so on. So our speakers are going to try to help us understand this phenomenon, dissect the phenomenon, and relate it to more specific and practicable purposes. Hopefully by the end of this discussion, once we have our own questions and answers, we could even relate it to more particular understanding. So we could develop a good idea of how the issue of citizenship, of identity, in this age of post-political governance, this state of political chaos that we are experiencing, what are the possibilities of what the Arab citizen is going to look like one day and other citizens of the world. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Emad Shahin. I'm privileged to have worked with Dr. Emad in the past commissioned articles from him, always eagerly looked into his own perception of what's happening in Egypt, but what's happening in Egypt as part of what's happening in the larger Arab world. He is an accomplished scholar with many publications, co-authored books and chapters in other books. Truly wonderful opportunity to welcome him to the stage. He's going to be talking to us for about 30 minutes. And after that, we have 4 speakers who are going to be talking anywhere between 10 to 12 minutes maximum before we take a break and then resume with the questions and answers. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Emad Shahin.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, of course, thank you for the Common Action Forum for inviting me here and for giving me the opportunity to share with you some views about the state of the Middle East, the state of its citizenry, and where it might be headed. From the beginning, I don't have any kind of conclusive findings or absolute conclusions. But I think this is a collective exercise that we all share and a collective responsibility, and that's what I will conclude with. How can we transform our talk into action, real action? When we talk about post-political governance, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is post-industrial or industrialized politics. Specifically, we should be talking about the primacy of economics over politics, the primacy of the tertiary sector of the economy over agriculture and industry, the place of the individual and also the populace, the demos that we talked about, as the core, at the core of politics, at the core of decision-making process, and of course their control over the political agenda, to discuss and to debate issues that are of concern to them, issues of environment, issues of choice, issues of impacts of globalization. My focus is on the Middle East, and when it comes to the Middle East, of course, we are talking about a different situation and totally different context. We're not talking about, of course, the death of politics that some have alluded yesterday, but we're talking about different types of politics. This is a region that is in the thick of politics, undergoing acute transformation, and it's a very strategic region that it needs to be dealt with in a very comprehensive and also through a well thought of plan for how to bring that region out of its transitional phase now and all this turbulence that is taking place. Yesterday, Mr. Waddah Hanfar, of course, talked about 2 concepts. He raised 2 concepts which I think very important. The first one is patterns. He used the word patterns several times, and change, and the need to understand what kind of patterns affect change and lead to transformation in the region. I think this is very important to identify these patterns in order to be less pessimistic and also to have to be more accepting as well of the changes that are taking place. We're all lamenting, and we feel sad, we all feel uncertain, and it's really a bleak picture when you look at Yemen, when you look at Syria, when you look at Iraq, anywhere, even Egypt and so on, anywhere. I mean, even the countries that seemingly are stable, when you look at the concept of governance, in them there is a complete absence of governance, proper governance as we understand it. So this is very important in order to at least understand the patterns that have always been crucial in transforming that region. There are so many elements, catalysts that lead to change in the region. I will try to focus or to talk about or identify 3. One, of course, is religion and ideologies. Religion and ideologies for thousands of years, for hundreds of years, has always been a major factor in transformation. And I'm here talking about system transformation. I'm not talking about regime transformation, system transformation, a total transformation from one state to another state. The second element is wars. The second element or catalyst or pattern is wars and revolutions. Wars have always been a decisive factor in the region. If you start from recently, 1948, 1967, 1973, and how wars have changed even the class structure, the rotation, the transfer of power in the region, from aristocratic, nobility, monarchical system into some kind of, middle-class driven systems and so on, the free officers and the coups everywhere and so on. That came as a result of wars as well. The wars came as the tipping point for the demise of one elite and the rise of another elite. Finally, of course, external intervention and external actors. External actors have always been also instrumental in transforming that region. Now, if you look at the middle, there are other things. Demography, there are economics, there are other things. But if you look at the region, these have always been important elements and factors in the transformation of politics and societies at large. The moment we are living now, currently, actually the three factors are into play simultaneously. Revolutions, or at least the desire for drastic, radical change in the region, driven by demography and socioeconomic elements, the youth, and the youth factor that we always talk about, and the socioeconomic changes that need to take place, and the manifestation, of course, is the demand for social justice and so on, and of course, the issue of religion and ideology that's taking the form of identity politics. They are all happening at the same time. Yesterday we talked about the need for migration or the possibility of migration. I think the region, and we all agree, the region actually is migrating. And some of us literally are migrating. Ramzi talked about refugees, migrating into a state of refugees or exiles, intellectuals abroad, and so on. Now, what we're seeing is the collapse of a new order. That's not news. The thing is, people are still doubting. Are we talking about regime transformation, changes that are taking place in the Middle East, or we are talking about something else? Actually, we are talking about something very similar to the aftermath of World War I, the collapse of the old order that in our region was manifested by the demise and disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. In Germany and other places, it was the Prussian Empire and the Hungarian Empire and so on. So that was a major transformation that led to the rise and emergence of a new system. The same thing will apply. This region also, either it will wait for a new order to sit in, we start to get a new order, or will remain in that state of transition for quite some time. What people, for example, like Richard Haas called the Middle East 30 Years War. That's what he's viewing now. Something similar to what happened in Europe during the 17th century. The war between Protestants and Catholics that engulfed several European countries into a 30-year war. The same thing. You look at the Sunnis, the Shias, all the collapse of these, or the conflict between these sects, ideas, primordial solidarities, and so on, into a prolonged war. Of course, this is where we have to be extremely alert and aware. Usually the recommendation in the West is, let's accept reality and let's be as it is and let it unfold. Let's start thinking of a Kurdistan, a recognized Kurdish republic or entity in the region. Maybe some other people would think about also a recognized entity for the Amazigh, or for the, I'm just giving examples, or for the Nubians, or for the people from Upper Egypt, or from the Houthis. This idea of accepting the disintegration, the devolution, not evolution in this case, but devolution of the region itself into primordial solidarities and basic affiliations. Is this new? Like this sounds very dangerous. Is it new? Of course, there is a very strong argument that says nothing is new. Actually, the region, if you look at it, a century ago, underwent similar manifestations. And as people say, these manifestations led to this integration that were a prerequisite for, or a precondition for, reconfiguration once again. I'll just spend a few minutes to explain this because this is extremely important, and also it can help us how to think of how we can move forward. Is it new? No, it's not new. A century ago, the Ottoman Empire was labeled what? The sick man of Europe. Nowadays, the Arab world or the Arab region is labeled or could be labeled the sick man or the sick region of the world. There are so many similarities between the two. One glaring similarity, of course, is the confusion, indecisiveness, and loss of control of old powers then. Be it the Ottomans themselves, history was really unfolding, things are getting out of control, many entities are calling for either separation, for independence, wars taking place, interventions here, and there is an extreme inability of controlling the situation, being indecisive, very inconsistency in policies, even on the part of superpowers and great empires. If you look at the situation now, the same complaint or the same observation we always direct, for example, against the Europeans or the United States. Lack of incoherent perception of a policy that has to be applied consistently in that region. How to deal with political Islam. That was since the Iranian Revolution. That everybody said Islam was political Islam was going to be the future of the region. You need a coherent policy. And of course, it was always maintaining the status quo. But just 5 minutes before the 30 minutes, let me know so I can, sure, thank you. So the same thing about the overemphasis on stability then and now. Also during the Ottoman Empire and the time of the Ottoman Empire, there was a need, overemphasis on maintaining stability on that region because it's too risky, it's too dangerous. So we have to impose mandates, we have to maintain physical presence, we have to support people who are moderates, who affiliate with our ideas and so on. The same thing nowadays. And you see this inconsistency and also overemphasis on stability that's very untenable for 30 years, for 60 years. The same formula has been applied and the same formula has failed, but still there is a desire to stick to that formula. The US and the European Union nowadays, they claim to want a new system in the region, but they support counter-revolutions and reward counter-revolutions. They want to deal with moderate Islamists, and they try to tell us that they distinguish between radicals and moderates. And once the moderates are out of power, they cheer. They even help vote out Islamic moderates from power. They tell us that they want a democratic, liberal middle way, but they always stand with autocrats, with the generals, with the fascists, all the time. They tell us that they want peace, but they rush getting into war, flying drones, killing here and there. It's the same notion of this inconsistent policy. The same thing if you look at 100 years ago and nowadays. And because the Arab uprising seemed to be a new phenomenon. No. The Arabs have always revolted. For a whole century they have been revolting. The same thing about, for example, explaining why the Arabs don't have democracy. Because they tell you, because we always had a weak democratic legacy. No, we had a democratic legacy that has always been aborted, either by external intervention or by their extension or the satellites, internal satellites and domestic satellites, starting from the Tanzimat period, from the dusturs of 1877. Tunisia had a constitution 1860. Egypt had a parliament 1866. Iranian constitution revolution 1905, and on and on. There is a legacy, a democratic constitutional legacy that has been suppressed in the region for a whole century. The same way when we talk about the uprisings, we talk about the uprising as if there is something new, because the Arabs revolt for what? For their tummies, for bread, but they never revolt for freedom. They have revolted for freedom, self-determination, and for, and I underline, full emancipation. And that's the essence of the struggle itself. Just to cite some examples, starting with 1916, the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire, the Egyptian revolution of 1919. These were not for bread. These were not for tummies and stomach. These were revolutions for independence. Whether, they were some kind of personal designs or not, but this was these were political movements. The Egyptian Revolution of 1919, the Palestinian Revolt of 1920, Yusuf al-Azma's revolt in Syria in 1920, Rashid Ali Khan's revolt in 1940, all failed, all aborted. And the result was what? Radicalization in the region. We have to look at this way, the same way about the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring is what? These are the revolts and revolutions for what? Dignity. That's what the Tunisians called, and he usually got upset when people called it the Jasmine Revolution or the Lotus Revolution. It's not very colorful. These are, periods of sacrifices and crushing of hopes and so on. These were the dignity revolution. And that was actually the alarming and threatening part about these revolutions. Revolutions for full emancipation, the second battle of independence, the true battle of independence. Another similarity, now 100 years back, the concessions, economic concessions. They used to call them concessions, economic concessions, tobacco, whatever, sugar, whatever, oil, cotton, whatever concessions. Now they call it globalization. And the need to integrate into the world economic market. And the option is very clear. You integrate or you become marginalized. You will be dubbed as axis of evil. And if you look at the countries that constituted, regardless of whether we like them or not, that constituted the axis of evil in the region, Syria, Iran, Sudan, countries that never, and Iraq, countries that never, before of course Saddam, Iraq, countries that never dealt with the IMF, countries that were never integrated into the world economic market and into globalization. And they had to be ostracized and they had to be marginalized. Depolarization, the same thing. 100 years ago, the depolarization and identity politics was very raging. And the difference was, the label then was between Europeanized, mutafarnijun, that's what they used to call them, and conservatives, muhafizun. Now it's between what? Secularists and Islamists. The same identity politics, deep identity politics and so on. The same false claims about civilizing missions and universalism. And there are some universal values that have to be adopted. With also active social and political engineering to change the social and political landscape of the region. Finally, radicalization. 100 years ago, there were also these attempts for despair. There were despair, assassination attempts, radical groups, clandestine groups, underground. That's how the nationalistic movement started in Egypt with the Hizb al-Watani. Some groups, assassinating British officers and soldiers and so on. And everywhere, the radicals and radicalizations was taking place. Now, where does the Arab Spring kicks into this? We talked about an old system in terms of order of things that was collapsing, and the possibility for the emergence of a new order with totally different configuration, totally different arrangements. That's exactly where the Arab Spring would have kicked in, and that's exactly where the conservative elements, regional and international, realized the threat and the potential of the Arab uprisings in reconfiguring the entire region. The traditional division of that region and description of that region as moderates, and we know who the moderates are, and radicals, and also we know who the radicals are, would have been passé. We would have a new division in the region between democratic, free, emancipated states, countries that share with the entire global world, with the entire humanity, certain universal values of self-determination, sovereignty of the people, liberties, freedoms, dignity. This is exactly what was to be the dominant value system and belief system of that region. We're talking about core countries. If emancipated, Egypt, Tunisia, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, key countries, Libya, the rest will follow, and buffered, cushioned by belt countries that share the same determination, Turkey and Iran. Imagine a Middle East region after the Arab uprisings, have they succeeded with that type of configuration? That would be a total totally different game ball. Now, we are not there, and it was aborted, but it's an ongoing process. The region, just to move, the region is definitely facing clear and tangible challenges. I said it's an ongoing struggle, ongoing process, but there are at least 3 or 4 factors that can help us determine where the region is headed 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. I know this is a big claim to make, but there are the facts of, first, demography, the demographic factor, the youth factor. And I will just touch on them very quickly. How many minutes I have? You have the water and food scarcity in the region. That's something that's going to be there, whether there is Islam or not Islam, whether there are revolutions or not revolution. And in the absence of governance, we are talking about post-political governance. Post-political governance here referring to what? The absence of governance, the collapse of states, the collapse of state authority and failing states. We have the state of the economies, Arab economies 5, 10, 15 years from now. We have failing states, we have primordial affiliations, and increase of the role of non-state actors. This is the map. These are the factors that will shape the future of the region from now on. Other things will be marginal. Other things will be just a manifestation of the failure to address these issues. Whether we're talking about radicalization, whether we're talking about suicide bombing, whether we're talking about stabbing and so on, we are talking about a series of, or many, like symptoms of all these elements and sicknesses. I will touch, and sorry just to be brief and to be jumping, 1 or 2 alarming factors that really reflect very alarming figures. One is the youth factor. I know everybody heard, every conference you go to, they tell you the Arab youth are 60% from the age of 15 to 29 or 45 or whatever. All right? Now, listen to these figures. 2030, the youth population in the Middle East is expected to reach almost 100 million. All right? That's not alarming figure. What's alarming is 2020, Middle East youth, the young, will need 46 million jobs. 46 million jobs in 5 years in order to reduce the unemployment level to the global level near 6%. That's an impossible mission. Even the United States cannot achieve that. Even the European Union and the United States combined cannot achieve that. Cannot provide 46 million jobs in 5 years. That's what's needed. I'm just touching on, I had longer figures and everything, the water and food scarcity. This is one of the most food import dependent region in the world. Because of the lack of water resources, the region, and of course lack of agricultural productivity, lack of governance, the region imports more than 50% of its food consumption, 50%. It imports 2/3 of its needs of sugar, 50% of its needs of cooking oil, and 1/3 of its dairy products. So any fluctuations in market prices and supplies and so on can really cause dire famine and hunger in the region itself. Economic performance, I just mentioned what relates to this. In order to address these issues, jobs and stuff like that, and food scarcity and all these issues, the region must achieve a growth rate of 7.8% annually. 7.8. The current rate now is 3.7. That's on average. If you take countries like Egypt or other countries, it's 2 point something, 2.4 or something like that percent. So we're talking about an impossible mission to catch up even with what's the basic needs of that region. State capacity, 8 states in the region are classified as failing states when it comes to human rights violation, when it comes to the state legitimacy, the perception of the legitimacy of the state itself, elite factionalism within each respective state, and political grievances. These are some of the criteria. The index looks at these criteria. Inability of many states to provide basic services and the basic needs of its population. I'll just give one example, the flooding of Alexandria that took place in Egypt last month. That was an indication of a clear state failure even to clean the sewage. You have to call in the military to clean the sewage in order to drain the water and so on. Finally, non-state actors. This has been a phenomenon that many political analysts in the States have pointed to, which is the increasing role of non-state actors with transnational impact and effect, starting with Hezbollah, with Hamas. Now you have Al-Qaeda, of course, and then you have ISIS, and then you have the franchises everywhere. Like some people, usually when I say, they say, but ISIS is a state, fine. But you have ISIS in Sinai, you have ISIS in Libya, you have ISIS. These are acting as non-state actors. They don't have a state, but acting as non-state actors with global implications. We talked about, the global danger and threat and so on. Finally, conclusion, the way forward. If we talk, nothing will happen. If we keep talking, nothing will happen. If we talk to each other in this room, nothing will happen. And I assure you, because I have been here for 20 years, places like this for 20 years. What we need to do is come up with a workable, action-oriented agenda, project-oriented agenda that you can take down to grassroots level. If not grassroots level, and this is too, it will dirty our hands, this is not our job, at least to policy-making circles. I'm not talking about rulers. I'm talking about policy making or making and even affecting areas, circles that can affect policies everywhere. And there are so many circles that we can work at. International NGOs, local NGOs, local politics. There are so many things, changing of ideas and perceptions. As an educator, I always talked about education, education, education. That's what I was raised to or learned to do. If you look at all the reform movements, all reform thinkers, they start with education. It's too late now. Unfortunately, 5 years is too long. 10 years is too long. It's the media. It's the media. Unfortunately, it is the media. It is the media that made half of the Egyptian population cherish massacring the other half. It is the media that's affecting our mindset to the extent that we accept what's going on in Syria. For 4 years, an entire population is being massacred. Nobody raised the flag anywhere. Nobody, still people thinking, should Bashar go or not go? After the Paris attack, with all respect, my university put the French flag and flowers everywhere. 130 lives are much more precious than 250,000 lives. Blood is the same. Blood is the same everywhere. In Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Paris, in Nigeria, everywhere. Blood is everywhere. And we should always stand for this. 2 levels. The macro level that intellectuals love to do and get engaged in a debate. We should promote citizenship first, or democracy first. Is our process or road should be democracy or it should be identity? Pan-Arabists, of course, and Islamists, they love the idea of identity. We should get, into reconstruct the nations, national integration, and so on and so forth. People who love democracy, like myself, we call for democracy. But both of them are necessary, but not sufficient conditions. They cannot work on their own. You need a political framework in which citizenship and identity or democracy can function, can operate. That framework is the nation state. A modern nation state that respects rule of law, individual and public freedoms, people's sovereignty, separation and division of power, and transfer of power. That's what we need. And the state should not be the vehicle, the instrument that will deliver the citizen. Never. It is the manifestation, the transformation or translation of the will of its citizens. That's how we need a new state. That state has never been there before. Don't tell me we tried that but failed. We have never tried there. There is no state in Saudi Arabia. There is no state in Egypt. There is no state in Morocco. In Algeria, I know I will anger everybody. I know about state that's a rational state, that's an impartial state, that's an effective state, that it is the outgrowth of the collective will of its citizens. This state does not exist in the Middle East, and the Arab world. It does not. That's one level. Finally, more micro level. We talked about utopia yesterday, and that's fine. It's very good to dream. But unfortunately, our dreams also should reflect the reality. Our reality actually requires now, what it requires damage control. I know some people would love to have this grand agenda and grand plan for reform and for taking off. We don't have it. I've studied this for 20 years. We don't have it. We have to be action-oriented. All these, look at Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi. Who can write more than 140 books than Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi? He wrote the Constitution of Pakistan. He wrote Islamic Constitution of Pakistan. He wrote, the principles of Islamic government. He wrote about the Islamic government. Khomeini talked about the Islamic government. And when it comes, Hassan al-Turabi wrote about Islamic government. And he himself said, I didn't know that running a state would be more difficult than writing about it. So all these kind of, like mental exercises are good, excellent. But the reality is much more important than the writing exercise and the mental exercise. So we need damage control as soon as possible. What do we mean by damage control? Prevent the increasing disintegration of more states in the region. We lost Iraq. We lost Sudan. We are going to lose Libya. We are going to lose Yemen. We are going to lose Syria. And Egypt is a candidate. Algeria is a candidate. Morocco is a candidate. Saudi Arabia is a candidate. Everyone is a candidate once this germ of primordial solidarities and these kind of very old communal affiliations runs into these countries. We'll lose them. Definitely. That's exactly what happened to the old order. And instead of an Ottoman Empire, you got multiple ineffective nation states under mandate, under colonial powers, and so on. We need representation, of course, and integration at local and national level. That's where our role can kick in. I'm not talking about theory, by the way. I'm talking about training, about building ranks and file, about bringing people from there somewhere else to train them very quickly on management, on administration, running local government, municipal government. We're talking about building individuals, building citizens. That's where role can. I'm not talking about theory, do's and not to do's, and give them manual and that's it, and send them home. Equitable distribution of resources and elimination of corruption. I always believe what brought Ben Ali's regime, two factors: corruption and his human rights violation. And that's exactly what will bring also the fascist regime in Egypt. It's human rights violation, it will bring him down, and it's corruption. The way forward is a democratic option and not the war option. Civil wars and all that, this is not in the interest of anyone. Not even the superpowers that think that they can fight proxy wars and deplete each other in that battlefield. That would not work because it will backfire. And I always said that, and I say that now with hesitancy even, because this should not be said in public. You based your policies on the formula of stability, you will never get stability. Not in the Middle East, but not even home. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's very clear, and it's very obvious. But this hubris and arrogance cannot go forever. People have to stop at some point and think about what's need to be. We need, and this is my conclusion, to consider carefully the cost of the failure of democratization in the region and the high cost of supporting fascist and repressive regime. Thank you very much.